I'm Mr. MegaManFan, and today we're looking at Oystron on Homebrew Review. This is an Atari VCS game that's pretty old in the homebrew scene, at least as old as 2004. That's the oldest review I can find for it, but I think I may have owned it even before that. This game has been on the scene for a while now. It was written by Piero Cavina, who originally intended it as an exercise in reusing sprites on screen to fill the screen with as many enemies as possible, and then eventually expanded it into the full game that you see here. Now the premise is fairly simple. These things coming at you on the screen are not asteroids, they're actually space oysters. And what you're doing is shooting them to convert them into pearls, and once you do, you put down the pearls in the pearl zone, which is the left half of the screen. If you can fill an entire horizontal line with pearls, that will clear all of the pearls at once and reset the line to fill it in again, which of course gives you bonus points. Vertical lines of pearls don't count, only horizontal ones, and believe me, I've tried. There are things that will stop you from doing this, besides the space oysters, which if you don't shoot, you have to avoid because running into them will kill you. You've also got these little fishy things that will come and take away your pearls. You've got these multiple flashing targets that seem to clear an entire line if you don't shoot them down before they get to the edge of the screen. There's any number of obstacles in your way to completing a line. And of course, every so often, the dreaded Oystron appears, and he's just a mean son of a gun who wants to destroy you and doesn't even care about the pearls. There's two ways to solve the Oystron problem. The lines that you clear give you bombs, which you can lay down in the path of the Oystron, and when he steps on one, kaboom! Or you can wait until he mutates into a space oyster, but then you've got to avoid him the whole time until that transformation occurs, and you won't get any extra points like you would for killing him. And once you do kill him, the game increases in difficulty and speed, as most Atari 2600 games will do, homebrew or not. The longer you play, the harder they get, and the object is not to finish the game, it's just to get the highest score and survive for as long as you possibly can. Now, if you're looking at this with the right set of eyes, Oystron is a really beautiful game. Some people may see this and think these graphics are really blocky and primitive, but for my money, which is literally $25 what this cartridge cost both then and still today, inflation has not raised the price of this game, I would say it's an impressive visual display on the Atari VCS because Piero Cavina, as noted, did intend this to showcase how many sprites you could put on the screen at one time. And to me, he succeeded in that goal because they're all unique objects that all maintain their visual acuity from one side to the other. They don't flicker in and out. There's no cheating here by mirroring one half of the screen to the other. Each side is completely independent. It's really, really significant that he can pull this off when you have to race the beam, as it's called in Atari VCS programming. You've only got a limited amount of time to execute code and draw things to the screen before that timer sweeps back across again to draw the next horizontal line of the playfield. It happens faster than your eye can see, but it's not like it's a lot of time in terms of code cycles. You have to really carefully manage every single asset in your code to pull something off like this. So Piero Cavina is obviously an extremely skilled programmer, as are any of these people who worked on Atari 2600 homebrews. In my mind, they're legends. Andrew Davey, Thomas Chench, Piero Cavina, so on and so forth. It's just miraculous that they're able to create games of this complexity and depth on the Atari VCS, which we know better as the Atari 2600 these days. A game like this, if it had come out in the 70s or 80s, it would have been seen as damn near miraculous. We take for granted that homebrew games are this good in the modern era, when Atari VCS games of the time were often far more primitive than this. Once in a while, you'd get something really spectacular like Defender or Junior Pac-Man or Missile Command that came straight from Atari themselves, or you'd get really nice third-party games like Pitfall, River Raid Decathlon from Activision, but a lot of Atari games, and I'm trying to be nice when I say this because I'm very fond of this system. I have great affection for it, but a lot of Atari VCS games were very, very primitive by comparison to this. So it's commendable and it's very playable. This is an easy game to get wrapped up in and addicted to once you get the basic play mechanics down. And another thing that I think is really impressive and not necessarily intuitive the first time you play is that some of these enemies on the playfield can only be attacked from the opposite side. They will come at you right to left, but they're only vulnerable left to right. So you have to actually move forward and turn around to shoot them in the vulnerable spot. The fact that he actually thought of that and coded that into this game gives it a complexity unlike so many other of the shooter games that you could play in this era. You know, a lot of your hardcore shoot 'em up games that appeared on systems like TurboGrafx 16 and Nintendo Entertainment System and Sega Master System, they didn't even have a mechanic for turning around and shooting right to left. It was all either scrolling bottom to top or left to right with your gun facing one way at all times. And then of course you would get the options, the spread shots, the bombs, the playfield clearing missiles, everything that you could get under the sun, but you'd still be facing one way at all times. I think the only game that really comes to mind that totally blew this concept out of the water, and they tried their best to imitate it on Atari 2600, but they didn't quite achieve it, was Vanguard, which in the arcade you could move and shoot independently in 4 different directions. You had both the joystick and the firing buttons, and you had sections that went horizontally, vertically, and diagonally. And of course, without some sort of 2-stick solution for Atari 2600, you couldn't really replicate that because there weren't enough buttons. There was only one firing button, so you had to fire in the direction you're facing. Therefore, Vanguard on Atari 2600 can't really replicate the arcade feel. Now, if somebody could make a hack of it that would be a twin-stick solution, I'd be all for that. Or maybe you could use the numeric keypad that was for the basic programming cartridge, and you could use that as multiple buttons to fire with, say, 2 for shooting up, 8 for shooting down, 4 left, 6 right. Still might be a little clunky, but you could have the joystick in port 1 and the numeric keypad in port 2 and sort of pull that off. I'm actually surprised somebody hasn't tried to make a hack of Vanguard that way, but there may not be enough lines in the code left over in the small file size that they had to use for the ROM chip, or these days what would be an EEPROM, a programmable ROM. There might just be memory limitations that would make adding extra code to do that almost impossible. Got a little off the topic there talking about Vanguard, but suffice it to say, when I'm thinking about Vanguard while playing Oystron, that is actually a high compliment to Oystron because it's doing not as much as Vanguard, but more than a lot of other games that you would play on Atari 2600. The only questions that I really want answered, which I can't answer for you in this video, so perhaps somebody on AtariAge.com in the forums can answer that, is when exactly this game got released. Like I said, it's got to be from before 2004, because that's the oldest reviews of it, and I could swear I bought the cartridge before 2004 or 2004 at the latest, but it appears to me it's been around even longer than that. The scan of the cartridge that Atari Age has when you look at their rarity guide is actually from Hoser Video, and I don't believe Hoser Video exists anymore, but they were making Homebrew Atari 2600 cartridges before Atari Age was, and I joined Atari Age in the very early 2000s, so it just goes to show that this scene has been active for quite a while. People have been making homebrew Atari games as far back as the 1980s, but as far as distributing them, selling them, mass producing them, that really took off in the 90s and especially in the early 2000s when conventions became all the rage and you could sell your games at conventions like Philly Classic, Classic Gaming Expo, OVGE in Oklahoma. The list goes on and on. But if you want this game right now, you don't have to wait for a convention. You can get it from the AtariAge.com store, and you can even download a ROM on AtariAge.com and try it for free. I'm Mr. MegaManFan. This has been a homebrew review of Oystron, and as always, thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, and your comments always help the channel out. So feel free to leave your comments about this game below. Thanks.